What if Brad Marchand's cup run with the Panthers never happened because the Bruins decided to go a different way?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoke to Be. Today is Monday, June 9th. Thank you so much for making Locked On Bruins your first listen every day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today we are discussing whether the Bruins did the right thing trading Brad Marchand to the Florida Panthers. We're going to explore three paths they could have taken. Keep him without an extension, re-sign him long-term, or trade him to another team, or what they actually did with the Florida Panthers. Then we'll evaluate, did they strike the best balance between loyalty and long-term planning? And this all comes after Brad Marchand, of course, scored two big goals for the Panthers, including the overtime game winner in Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final. Game 3 goes tonight. Before we get into all that, a quick reminder, you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my hockey thoughts, dad jokes at Ian C. McLaren. The podcast is available on X, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, even TikTok. I am a lifelong Boston Bruins fan. I have been covering this team and the NHL at large for various outlets for about 20 years. And I can understand if we're tired of the Brad Marchand discourse, but if the tone on X and in my replies is any indication, this is still a hot button topic for Bruins fans. A lot of people don't like seeing Brad Marchand wearing Florida Panthers colors and being 3 wins away from a Stanley Cup championship. A lot of people wish he had finished his career in black and gold. A lot of people bemoan the return for the Brad Marchand trade and wonder whether or not they could have gotten more for him had they not chosen to send him to a fierce recent division rival in the Florida Panthers. So I thought it would be fun this morning to do a bit of a what if here and discuss, did the Bruins do the closest thing to the right thing by trading Marchand to the Panthers? And again, I see 3 different paths they could have taken. Keep him for the final year of his contract without an extension. He would have missed the playoffs, not had this run. Re-sign him long-term to between like 7 and 8, which is where it looks like he's going to land. Or trade him to a team that wasn't on his no-trade list, but was not the Panthers. And perhaps get a hypothetical or theoretical better return. So let's start with keep him past the trade deadline without an extension. They could have kept him through this season and decided on his future, beginning as early as a couple months ago when they were eliminated from the Stanley Cup playoffs. Don't forget, Brad Marchand was injured at the time of the trade. So there was some uncertainty as to how long he would be out and whether or not he could make an impact for an acquiring team. The Bruins had cleaned house prior to the trade deadline, and Marchand was like the last deal they made, sending him to the Florida Panthers for that conditional first-round pick, the conditions of which have been met for the most part. It is top 10 protected. You could keep the captain and culture leader for the balance of the regular season. You buy some time to assess his performance and his health before extending him. That would have avoided some premature emotional fallout, and it signals a measure of continuity to fans and teammates in light of Charlie Coyle being traded to the Colorado Avalanche, Brandon Carlo being traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs, Trent Frederick having been traded to the Edmonton Oilers, Justin Brazeau to the Minnesota Wild. Having said that, though, there was a real risk of losing him for nothing in free agency. The two sides were not able to come to a contract extension agreement. And yes, you can drag Don Sweeney and company for perhaps nickel and diming a captain who had been playing on a very team-friendly contract for the last several seasons. But at the same time, he turned 37 on May 11th. He was injured at the time of the trade, and perhaps the risk of losing him for nothing was more attractive than re-signing him for in the neighborhood of, people have said as low as 6 to as high as 7.5. His value now certainly increasing to the point where people are saying he could get $8 million in the open market this offseason. So you risk losing him for nothing in free agency. That's a massive risk. You don't want that to happen. We're seeing that with the Toronto Maple Leafs and Mitch Marner. Some guys could walk from the Florida Panthers even, including Marchand, Sam Bennett, John Tavares in Toronto, among others. There's uncertainty that could drag into the offseason, which could impact roster planning. We saw the impact of last season's contract stalemate with Jeremy Swayman. Seems as though the Bruins wanted to avoid a repeat of that at all costs. Of course, no asset return if he walks. And it would also have delayed transition to younger leadership. Right now, we have a situation where David Pastrnak's the likely next captain. Charlie McAvoy is a leader on this team, as is Jeremy Swayman. And by doing kind of a clean sweep of some more established veterans on this team, you have that transition pretty much set at this point. And it could have led to the possibility of an even messier, drawn-out, public breakup. So keeping him around until or past the trade deadline and going into the offseason without a contract extension is tempting for stability and also for the possibility of coming to a contract agreement. Maybe one side bends and the Bruins go up in their offer, or Marshon comes down. But the Bruins could have ended up empty-handed and kind of caught trying to commit to Marshon and allowing some other younger options on the open market to disappear. So those are kind of the pros and cons of keeping him through the balance of this regular season without an extension. It's tempting for stability, but very risky for asset management, especially when all signs were that maybe they weren't going to get to a contract agreement. What if they committed to Marchand long-term out of loyalty and belief in his current and future value? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's so easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Now, Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop managing your money and start building wealth. When we started using Monarch, we realized how many streaming services we had that we don't really make use of that much. Now we budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Thank you so much once again for making Locked On Bruins part of your daily routine. It's available in your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Please do smash that subscribe button so that you never miss a thing. And like the video, hit that bell as well so that you're notified whenever a new podcast drops. So we discussed the possibility of the Bruins keeping Brad Marchand post-trade deadline without a contract extension, risking lose him for nothing. What if they offered him a 2 to 3 year deal at $7 to $8 million AAV to keep Marshon through age 39, 40? Well, you would still be keeping an effective winger. He did have a pretty productive season prior to being traded to the Florida Panthers, and he's still a very high level performer in the playoffs, as we're seeing right now. In the regular season for the Boston Bruins, he was clutch, both ends of the ice, 23 goals, 28 assists for 51 total points in 71 games. So far in the postseason, he's been even more impactful for the Florida Panthers. Let me just pull up his full numbers here. But, I mean, he has been just so good for them. He had 2 goals in the Game 2 overtime win, double overtime win, including the game winner. He had 1 goal in the Game 1 overtime loss. And, of course, has been so clutch over the course of his career for the Bruins, now the Panthers. 17 points in 19 games. Just really stepping up here for his new team. So he's clearly worth that kind of money in this scenario for the Panthers. At this time, he is stepping up. Having said that, in the regular season, he is coming off 2 seasons in which he recorded 67 points. He had been up to 80 in 2021-22, 69 points in 53 games the year before that, but a steady decline in production over the past few seasons as wear and tear begins to mount, off-season surgeries and the like, keeping him from just being the guy that he was. Still an effective winger, to be sure, and he can still contribute all over the ice. He had a shorthanded goal in Game 2. You're rewarding a franchise icon with legacy value. He's not necessarily an $8 million player over the course of an 82-game season anymore. But, of course, he did have a very team-friendly contract for the Bruins over the course of the majority of his career. And you kind of be rewarding him that icon status with legacy value. And, of course, would avoid another PR hit after losing or trading away other core players. But there's some risks to that as well. It can be a cap liability if performance dips or injuries arise. It could block internal growth for players like Fabian Lysell, Matt Poitras, reduces roster flexibility in an important phase of retooling. And that kind of contract, you have to admit, has the potential to age poorly, like other late career contracts around the NHL. Just think back to Zdeno Chara. He was he was told they weren't going to be re-signing him in favor of younger options. You look at the Tampa Bay Lightning. Last summer, they allowed effectively Steven Stamkos to depart as a free agent, giving his money to a younger Jake Gensel. So when you look at the upcoming free agent market, and yes, a lot of the cap is tied up to perhaps some misses last summer. Would you rather be paying Elias Lindholm $7.75 million from age 30 to 37? Or would you rather be paying Brad Marchand that money from 37 to 40? He was Lindholm rated as one of the top defensive centers last season, showed some offensive pop, should be able to at least match Marchand's 51 points from this past season. This would be a loyalty first option. You're appeasing the fan base. You are rewarding a franchise icon, but it also comes with significant risk. The Bruins could find themselves locked into an expensive farewell tour, in essence. And the question is, do you want to be on the hook for $8 million, Brad Marchand, when you are 37, 38, 39, up until his 40th birthday? Based on how he's playing for the Florida Panthers right now, yes. But this is kind of a chance for him to win a cup here in the final stages of his career. So he's going to go all out and then some in this particular opportunity, because no matter where he signs, no matter where he decides to finish off his career, there's no guarantees of winning a Stanley Cup. Florida presented the best possible opportunity for him. We'll discuss this coming up, but Don Sweeney acquiesced to that request by sending him to the team that he wanted to go to. It's paying off for Brad Marchand and for the Florida Panthers. And if the Bruins had decided to hold on to him, he wouldn't have gotten this playoff run. If they decided to re-sign him, maybe he's a big part of the retool, and maybe they get back to the postseason next year and he's able to accomplish what he did in 2011, but what he was not able to do in 2013, 2019, and 2023 as a member of the Boston Bruins, which is win another Stanley Cup. And maybe they're hamstrung by that high cap hit and have reduced flexibility come July 1st, when there will be younger options who can help this team for years to come. These are conversations that need to be had. Instead, they chose to trade Marchand to the Florida Panthers. But how much flexibility did they really have? And was Florida the best move? We'll discuss that here as the podcast continues. All right, so Brad Marchand, currently a member of the Florida Panthers, 17 points in 19 playoff games. He's met the conditions for turning the conditional second-round pick into a first-round pick in 2027. I believe it's still top 10 protected, but the facts are Boston worked out a trade with Florida, Marchand's preferred destination, but they did have some room to explore other options. Marchand had a modified no-trade clause with an 8-team no-trade list, not a full no move. So it's not exactly like Taylor Hall and the Buffalo Sabres saying he's only going to be traded if you send him to Boston. Bruins did have some flexibility, but still required his buy-in. They very well could have targeted a team with a higher pick or better prospects, and a more aggressive trade could have helped further accelerate the retool. You maximize the asset before value declines. I've never really been adverse to trading Brad Marchand. I said a couple of years ago, he defined it as a tough take that, when Bergeron retired, it's well worth exploring. Did the Bruins do their due diligence? Did they seek the best possible trade? Marchand did still have some leverage to steer where he'd go. So we don't know the other teams on his no trade list, but still a lot of options out there. And you have to discuss the optics of sending him to a team that was out of the playoff picture or not a preferred destination, maybe you get a bit better return, but you're also forcing an undesired deal that could damage player relations and team culture. Fewer teams realistically in the mix due to cap space, playoff contention, and it might have upset both Marchand and the fan base even more if he was sent somewhere that he didn't really want to go to or that was well out of the playoff race or somewhere without his consent or even approached him to waive his no trade clause. And look, there's no guarantee. I've seen a lot of people say we need to see what the other offers were. We need to know what was on the table in order to compare and contrast what the Bruins got from the Florida Panthers versus what was on the table. Don't forget, he was injured at the time. So the Bruins didn't have a ton of leverage in terms of pushing for the maximum possible return because it wasn't even clear how long he'd be out for, whether he'd be fresh for the playoffs, and if he could make this kind of impact for any other playoff team other than the Florida Panthers. Right now, he's perfectly positioned in a third line supportive role. He's meshing well with Anton Lundell and Eetu Luostarinen. He's not being called upon to be a top player for this team, but he's performing as such because he has that role similar to what he had at the Four Nations face-off with Team Canada, kind of a depth role where he can shine and his strengths can come to the fore. So there's no guarantee that he would be this effective with any other team, nor do we know that another team was offering more than what the Florida Panthers were offering. And there was still some leverage to steer where he wanted to go. Marshon, in the end, was traded to Florida, a very cup-ready team he was more than willing to join. And the return will likely be a mid to late first-round pick, temporary cap relief without overcommitting in the later years of his career, and it's kind of akin to ripping off the Band-Aid, avoiding emotional drag and giving both sides a fresh start. They were all in terms of trading some core players and retooling, getting as many assets as possible at the deadline. And look, I said yesterday on X, if you trade Brad Marchand for Fraser Minton and a first-round pick or comparable prospect pick, you're laughing, right? That's what they got for Brandon Carlo, of all players. And if you switched the returns for Carlo and Marchand, I don't think people would have the same issues. Could they have squeezed out more? Possibly. But given Marchand's partial control, the timing, his injury status, maybe this was the most reasonable balance they could have struck. You keep him, you risk losing him for nothing. You sign him long-term, that deal could very much age poorly. If you trade him to another team, perhaps that also creates some more ill will towards management. And we don't get, or Brad doesn't get, the best possible chance to win a Stanley Cup. It struck a balance between respect for a franchise icon by giving him a prime opportunity to win a cup. It gave the Bruins some cap flexibility heading into this offseason and a modest to respectable asset return. A first-round pick is nothing to sneeze at. Now, we can wish Brad Marchand finished his career in Boston, and I still do. I would have loved to have seen Marchand, Chara, before them, Joe Thornton, Ray Bourque, Jason Allison. These are all former captains that did not end their careers in Boston for a variety of reasons. You can wish he finished his career in Boston, and I still do, but also still acknowledge this might have been one of, if not the best available option. Both things can be true at the same time. Keeping him risked losing him for nothing. Overpaying him could have affected you, even with the cap going up. Pushing for a bigger deal may have taken things off the table or hurt relationships if you're sending him to a team that's not on his list, but is out of the playoff picture or further away from his family or somewhere he did not want to go. The Bruins chose clarity, flexibility, and respect. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but perhaps the closest thing to right. Let me know what you think. Hit me up in the YouTube comments. Hit me up on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads. There's no easy answers here. There's no black and white responses or clear green light, red light options for the Boston Bruins or for Brad Marchand. But for him, he has his best chance at a Stanley Cup. You can be happy for him, but also rooting against the Panthers, which is kind of where I'm at. No right or wrong answers when it comes to what happened with Brad Marchand. At the end of the day, it is a business, but there are personal ties. And the Bruins, I believe, tried to do tidy business while also trying to preserve that relationship by giving him a chance to win a cup. You send him anywhere else, and maybe you don't get the same return. Maybe you get a better return, but a less chance at winning the cup for Brad. Maybe you get similar to what you got for Brandon Carlo, Fraser Minton, and a first-round pick. Again, swap those returns, put it all together, and I think they still did pretty well at the trade deadline. Would I have loved to see Brad Marchand finish his career, re-sign with the Bruins, play it out, retool, get back to Stanley Cup contention? Yes, but as we learned in 2019, it's not a perfect world. The ideal scenario, or what seems like the best possible outcome, isn't necessarily always going to work out. That's it for today's episode of Locked On Boston Bruins, my friends. Thank you so much for making this podcast part of your day. Please do check out the Locked On NHL Game Night podcast next. Every game, every night, covered in depth until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Local analysis on a national scale. It's available on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day. Please do take care of yourselves, take care of each other. We'll talk to you again here on the next episode of Locked On Boston Bruins.